So, I've got something incredibly gripping for you today. And if you're into true crime that really sticks with you, you're going to want to stay for this one. Before we dive in, take a moment to hit subscribe, like the video if this case gets you thinking, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to know what you think happened and why. Welcome back to another episode of Case Closed, where we unpack the most unsettling and compelling true crime stories. I'm Anna, and today we're covering the absolutely heartbreaking case of Sydney Sutherland, a young woman from Arkansas whose life was tragically cut short in 2020.
Oh man, this one is, it's really tough. I've been reading about this case for days now, and I gotta say, it's one of those stories that just, sticks with you. Sydney was just going for a jog near her home when everything changed. And what makes it even more disturbing is how random yet not random it turned out to be, if that makes sense.
Exactly. I think what's really chilling about this one is that it happened in such a small, tight-knit community where people felt, safe. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, right?
Totally. And that's what makes this case so, particularly shocking. Because Sydney wasn't just some anonymous person in a big city. She was a beloved nurse, a daughter, a sister, a girlfriend, someone deeply connected to her community. And I think that's why her disappearance and what happened after created such massive waves in Arkansas. So Sydney Sutherland was, this 25-year-old registered nurse who lived in rural Jackson County, Arkansas. Really beautiful area, lots of farmland and open spaces. She was working at a medical facility in Newport, and everyone described her as just absolutely wonderful. One of those people who just lights up a room, you know what I mean? Super compassionate, which makes sense for someone in the nursing profession. And she was really close with her family and boyfriend.
Did she grow up in that area? Was she from Arkansas originally?
Yeah, she was a local girl through and through. Born and raised in that community, and everyone knew her. That's part of what made this so heartbreaking for the entire county. She had gone to college at Arkansas State, got her nursing degree, and then came back to serve her community. She was living with her boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, and they had, this whole life they were building together.
So what exactly happened on the day she disappeared?
It was August 19th, 2020, middle of the pandemic, Sydney went for a jog around 3 p.m. along County Road 41, which was this rural highway near her home. It was something she did regularly, just part of her routine, and when she didn't come home that evening, her family immediately knew something was wrong because she was super reliable, very predictable in her habits.
That's always the first red flag, isn't it? When someone breaks their normal routine.
Exactly. Her boyfriend reported her missing that same evening, and by the next morning, there was this massive search effort underway. We're talking hundreds of volunteers from the community, police, search dogs, helicopters. Everyone came together because this was one of their own who was missing. They found her cell phone about a quarter mile from her home the next day. But Sydney herself was nowhere to be found.
God, I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for her family. Just not knowing.
Totally. And in a small community like that, word spreads fast. The whole county was on edge. People were leaving their porch lights on, hoping she'd find her way home. There were prayer vigils. It was bumma, this collective holding of breath while everyone prayed for the best but feared the worst,
So, what happened next with the search? How did the investigation actually unfold?
So the search efforts were just, massive, really unprecedented for that area. We're talking about, hundreds of local volunteers combing through fields, ditches, and wooded areas. The Arkansas State Police brought in helicopters with thermal imaging, and search dogs were working around the clock. Jackson County only has about 17,000 people, So when several hundred show up to search, that's a significant portion of the community right there.
That kind of community response always touches me. Did they have any leads early on?
Not immediately, no. The only real clue they had was her cell phone that they found, but nothing that pointed to who might be responsible. The sheriff's department started interviewing everyone who lived along her jogging route, checking security cameras, the usual investigative steps, and here's where it gets interesting. Quote, they actually obtained cell phone data and and figured out which phones had been in the area during the time Sydney disappeared.
Oh, so they used cellular data to narrow down potential suspects?
Exactly. And, they created this map of all the phones that had pinged towers in that vicinity. After 2 days of intensive searching, they unfortunately found Sydney's body. She was buried in a rural area not far from where she'd been jogging. And the really chilling part is that the location was on a farm belonging to the Llewellyn family.
Wait, so her body was found on the suspect's property?
Yeah, it was on land farmed by the Llewellyn family, and when investigators cross-referenced their cell data, they saw that Quake Llewellyn's phone had been in the exact area where Sydney disappeared and, quote, and later where her body was found. That immediately made him a person of interest. Plus, and this is really important, Llewellyn had actually joined the search party himself.
Oh my God, he searched for her? That's so disturbing.
It is. It's incredibly disturbing, but not uncommon in these types of cases. Perpetrators often insert themselves into investigations to, keep tabs on what police know, or to appear innocent. When they brought Llewellyn in for questioning, he initially claimed he hadn't seen Sydney at all. But when confronted with the cell phone evidence and other inconsistencies in his story, he broke down and confessed.
So technology really played a crucial role in solving this case quickly.
Absolutely. Without the cell phone data, who knows how long it might have taken. The investigators also found physical evidence in his truck and on his clothes that matched Sydney's DNA. The whole investigation from disappearance to arrest took just about 3 days, which is remarkably fast for a case like this. But, the speed didn't make the outcome any less heartbreaking for that community. So, Quake Llewellyn, the man who confessed to Sydney's murder, was actually a 28-year-old farmer from the same community. And, this wasn't some stranger who came into town. He was someone who literally lived in the same rural area as Sydney. They weren't close friends or anything, but in a small community like that, they knew of each other. They had mutual Facebook friends and had actually graduated from the same high school, just a few years apart.
That's so unsettling. Did they have any personal history together?
Not really, no. And that's what makes this case so terrifying, right? During his confession, Llewellyn claimed he saw Sydney jogging while he was driving his truck on County Road 41. He said he turned around and according to his statement, he accidentally hit her with his truck.
Wait, he said it was an accident initially?
Yeah, that was his first claim, but the details that followed completely contradicted that. So he admitted that after hitting her, he loaded her body into his truck and drove her to a remote location. And then, and I hate having to say this, he sexually assaulted her. After the assault, he dug a hole using the equipment from his farm and buried her body.
Oh my God, that's absolutely horrific.
It truly is. And during his confession, investigators said he was, eerily calm, He described the whole thing with this, quote, this detached manner that the investigators found really disturbing. When they asked him why he did it, he couldn't really give them a coherent answer. Just said that he knew he was caught and that he was going to have to tell the truth.
Did he show any remorse at all?
Law enforcement reported that he showed very little emotion throughout the entire process. He just matter-of-factly described what he'd done. The really chilling part is that afterward, he went home, had dinner, and went about his normal routine. And then the next day, he joined the search party looking for Sydney, standing right alongside her family and friends while knowing exactly what he'd done to her and where her body was.
I can't even imagine how her family felt when they learned that someone who'd been searching with them was actually responsible.
Right? That betrayal on top of everything else. Ugh. It's just unimaginable. And, his confession definitely shocked the entire community. This was a guy who had no prior criminal record, at least nothing serious. He was a farmer, appeared to be a normal member of the community, and then committed this completely senseless, brutal crime.
So, what happened after Llewellyn confessed? I mean, did the case actually go to trial, or?
Well, the prosecution initially announced they would seek the death penalty, which is still legal in Arkansas. They had, overwhelming evidence against him. His confession, the DNA evidence, and the fact that he led police directly to where he'd buried her body. But in October 2021, about 1 year after the murder, there was actually a pretty significant development.
What happened?
Llewellyn ended up agreeing to a plea deal. He pled guilty to capital murder, rape, and kidnapping charges. And, by accepting this plea agreement, He avoided the possibility of the death penalty, but was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Like he's never getting out. Ever.
Was Sydney's family okay with that outcome? I imagine they might have wanted the death penalty.
Yeah. The family was consulted about the plea deal, and while I'm sure their feelings were incredibly complicated, they ultimately supported this resolution. Because, a plea deal meant they wouldn't have to sit through a lengthy, traumatic trial where all the horrific details would be repeatedly discussed in open court. And it also gave them some immediate closure rather than years of appeals that typically come with death penalty cases.
That makes sense. Was there any kind of statement from him during sentencing? Did he finally show any remorse?
During the sentencing hearing, Llewellyn did offer a brief apology to Sydney's family, but many observers noted it seemed kind of rehearsed and hollow. The judge wasn't particularly moved by it either, and made some pretty strong statements about the heinous nature of the crime while delivering the sentence. He emphasized that Llewellyn would spend every remaining day of his life behind bars.
God, the whole thing is just so senseless.
Completely senseless. And you know what really stood out during the legal proceedings? The prosecutor's statement that there was literally no motive they could establish. Like, it wasn't a crime of passion or revenge or anything that might, make some twisted kind of sense. It appeared to be a completely random, opportunistic attack, which honestly makes it even more terrifying.
Let's talk about the impact this had on the community. I mean, such a senseless crime in a small town must have really affected everyone, right?
Absolutely devastating for the community. Jackson County is like a close-knit rural area where everyone basically knows everyone, and Sydney was. She was really beloved there. After her disappearance, hundreds of community members immediately mobilized to search for her. They were out there day and night, combing fields, checking ditches, really hoping against hope.
That's incredible. What about after they found out what happened?
The community was just shattered. I mean, when the news broke about her murder, and especially the circumstances, it sent absolute shockwaves through the area. And what made it even harder to process was that Llewellyn wasn't some outsider, right? He was part of that same farming community, someone people knew and had trusted. So it really violated that sense of safety that small towns often have.
How did Sydney's family cope with all this? It's unimaginable.
Her family has been remarkably strong through an absolutely nightmare situation. They established the Sydney Sutherland Memorial Foundation, which actually provides scholarships to students pursuing careers in physical therapy, which is what Sydney was passionate about. They've also organized memorial runs each year because, she disappeared while jogging. So they've found ways to keep her memory alive while trying to create something positive from this tragedy.
That's really beautiful. Are there other ways the community has honored her?
Yeah, there's a permanent memorial near the location where she used to jog, and her running shoes were actually bronzed and placed at the memorial site. The community also holds candlelight vigils on the anniversary of her death, and, local businesses still have signs up saying, "Running for Sydney." It's just, the impact is still so deeply felt there.
It's one of those crimes that just makes no sense at all.
Exactly. When we cover these cases, there's often some explanation, not a justification obviously, but at least some understanding of what led to it. But here, there's just nothing. A young woman goes for a jog in her hometown, a place where she should have been completely safe, and randomly encounters someone who makes an incomprehensible decision that ends her life. It's the randomness that makes it particularly terrifying and heartbreaking.
So I think we've covered all the details of this truly tragic case. It's one that really stays with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. The Sydney Sutherland case is just... It's one of those that really highlights how fragile life can be, One moment, she's just out for a routine jog, and then, everything changes. And for what? There was no motive that makes any sense whatsoever. It's senseless violence that devastated an entire community.
And the ripple effects continue to this day.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Case Closed so important, right? We're keeping these stories alive, making sure victims like Sydney aren't forgotten. Her family has shown such incredible strength, turning their pain into something positive with that foundation and those memorial runs. It's really inspiring in the face of such tragedy.
Well, thank you so much for walking us through this heartbreaking case today, Adrian.
Of course. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in to Case Closed. This was definitely a difficult one to discuss, but these stories need to be told,
They absolutely do. And, Next week, we'll be covering the mysterious disappearance of Brian Schaffer, the medical student who vanished from a bar in 2006 and was never seen again.
Oh, that one is absolutely fascinating. So many twists and turns, and the security camera footage that shows him entering but never leaving. You're definitely not going to want to miss it.
Until then, stay safe, everyone.